Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving headfirst into a seriously eerie old legend about an isolated, forgotten village where everything basically flipped upside down the second the clock struck midnight. According to the source material we're digging into today, this was a place where a freezing wind would suddenly sweep through the streets, dogs would instantly go completely silent, and, most terrifyingly of all, one man inexplicably vanished every single night.
Just to really set the stage for you on this mystery, listen to this quote detailing the aftermath of these vanishings. No bodies were ever found. No signs of struggle. Only silence and fear. I mean, imagine that. This absolute lack of a single physical trace left the terrified locals totally desperate for answers. And ultimately, that desperation led them to blame their absolute nightmare on the restless spirits of two sisters who had died under mysterious circumstances decades earlier. And honestly, that brings us right to the core question we're going to unpack throughout today's explainer. Was this truly the work of hypnotic witches roaming the forest, like the legend insists? Or is there a highly rational, maybe much darker human truth hiding in the shadows of this folklore? We're going to put both the myth and the actual historical investigations under the microscope to find out.
Let's start with Section 1, the midnight disappearances. Picture this. During the day, everything in this village looked perfectly normal. Kids playing, farmers working their fields, women gathering water. But the stark contrast once sunset hit is just wild. The night brought on this absolute paralyzing dread. Doors were heavily locked, windows were firmly bolted shut, and parents would beg their sons to never, ever answer strange voices in the dark. Basically, once the sun went down, the darkness belonged to someone else.
To give you an idea of how rapidly this escalated, take a look at the timeline of a young farmer named Ravi. So it's a rainy evening and he decides to stay late in his fields. Right at nightfall, beneath this massive banyan tree, he spots two silent, smiling women dressed entirely in white. And almost like he's been totally hypnotized, he just follows them into the forest. But here is where it gets crazy. The next morning, a search party finds his footprints, and halfway through the dense woods, they just stop. They literally ended in thin air. And the worst part? After Ravi, another man vanished the exact same way the next night, and then another.
Moving on to Section 2, the White Witches. Since the village guards basically flat out refused to patrol at night, we really need to examine what exactly these people thought was hunting them. The local folklore wasn't just some vague, spooky shadow. No, they built this terrifyingly specific profile. Witnesses claimed these two women had unnaturally pale, white faces with long black hair that dragged all the way on the ground. Some even swore their feet were turned completely backward. But the absolute most sinister detail? They reportedly lured curious victims away by perfectly mimicking the voices of their family and loved ones.
Let's look at Section 3, hunting the shadows. Eventually, the villagers decided they couldn't just hide anymore. 4 armed hunters actually banded together to track these so-called witches. They marched into the pitch-black forest armed with lanterns, ropes, and rifles, totally determined to end it. First, they hear this soft, distant laughter, followed by the super creepy ringing of ankle bells. Then, out of nowhere, they are completely surrounded by a thick, heavy mist. The two white figures suddenly materialize out of the fog. But before the guys can even raise their rifles or shout, the women instantly vanish, sending the hunters running for their lives back to the village.
But they didn't all make it out unscathed, at least not for long. Here is the chilling consequence of that expedition. One of the hunters claimed he accidentally made direct eye contact with the witches during all that chaos. Well, exactly 1 week later, that very same guy became the next victim. He vanished without a single trace.
Okay, let's step back from the campfire for Section 4, the rational truth.
Time to look at the actual investigations conducted by journalists and historians years after the village was abandoned. When they dug into the old records, they confirmed a truly horrifying reality. A massive string of people really were going missing. It wasn't made up. However, as you'd probably guess, experts found absolutely zero scientific evidence or official proof that any supernatural beings existed. What the investigators actually concluded was that extreme, unchecked fear had completely hijacked the village's collective memory. It essentially mutated unexplained, real-world tragedy into a ghost story.
It's honestly like looking at a split screen of two completely different realities. On one side, you have deeply irrational folklore fueled by supernatural hypnosis and the ghosts of dead sisters. On the other side,
you have the highly rational theories from the experts. They point out that natural, very real dangers, think aggressive wild animal attacks in a dark forest, hidden criminal activity, or simply fatal accidents, are vastly more likely culprits for men disappearing in the wilderness in the middle of the night.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, the final warning. This underlying tension between myth and reality leads us straight to the village's last surviving witness, an elderly man who completely flipped the script on how these vanishings went down. He claimed to be the last person alive to have seen the mysterious women, but he insisted they never forced anyone into the woods, they just appeared. He said the victims actually followed them willingly, driven completely by their own curiosity. And he dropped this incredibly poignant line: darkness does not always live in the forest. Sometimes it grows inside the human mind. Wow.
Flash forward to today, and modernization has totally transformed the area. It's not this isolated pocket of the world anymore. They have paved roads, electricity is everywhere, and modern life has essentially replaced all those old traditions. But here is the crazy part. The psychological grip of the legend is still so deeply embedded in the culture there that locals still strictly refuse to enter that forest after midnight. They are still terrified of hearing distant laughter on the wind, even when the experts assure them it's literally just the rustling of trees and local wildlife.
To wrap up our explainer today, I want to leave you with a thought to chew on. Whether the horrific disappearances in this village were caused by wild animals, hidden criminals, or just something we simply can't explain, what does the lasting power of a scary story tell us about our own human vulnerabilities? Maybe legends aren't just there to give us a good scare. Maybe they exist to show us exactly what a community is most deeply afraid of. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning the stories you hear.